He has the weakest ability, but he's on his way to becoming the most powerful of all. In this world, when the mana in the air reaches a critical level, a deep chasm called the Abyss manifests, opening a portal to the void, a world of demons. The deeper you venture, the more powerful the beasts you encounter become. One night, in the protagonist's city, an abyss with a depth of 12 appeared, severe enough for beasts known as lords to show up. At that moment, an experienced warrior prepared his old axe for battle, after thinking he would never need to wield it again. He then instructed his grandson, Noel, to hide in an underground shelter while he bought time until help from the capital arrived. Noel protested, pointing out that there was no way of knowing when reinforcements would come, meaning his grandfather would fight alone and put his life at risk. To calm the young man, the veteran reminded him that he was Overdeath, the indomitable demon, and that he would protect his grandson even if it cost him his life. With those words, the warriors set out for battle. In the city, the beasts wreak havoc, devouring the population and setting fire to every home until Overdeath arrived and faced the creatures head-on. Their leader, a lower-class beast, ordered the human to be killed, but the old man exuded confidence, proving he wouldn't be an easy target. Meanwhile, Noel cried in his corner alongside the household staff. Suddenly, an explosion caught everyone's attention. Hours later, when the battle had ended, Noel emerged from the shelter in search of his grandfather. The city was in ruins, bodies strewn everywhere, and among them lay Overdeath, gravely wounded. As Noel approached him, he heard his grandfather say that age catches up with everyone, even him, and that this was the end of a seeker. For when you make battle your purpose, you always walk beside death. The old man then asked if, knowing this, Noel still wished to become a seeker. With tears in his eyes, the boy reaffirmed his desire. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, Overdeath asked his grandson to become a seeker, who would never be defeated. Noel promised to reach that level, and his grandfather declared that he had always loved him before drawing his last breath. As the young man wept before the tragedy, an older Noel recounted that his grandfather's name was Brandon Stalin, a man capable of defeating a beast from Abyssal Depth 13, the Silver Cositus, and who became the most renowned seeker known as Overdeath, the Indomitable, the greatest of all seekers. 2 years later, Noel followed in Brandon's footsteps as promised, joining his group to fight monsters threatening them in a cave. Noel ordered Lloyd and Walter to intercept the enemies while Tanya provided support from the rear. Thanks to the mage's blinding spells, the warriors found openings to defeat their opponents on the front line while Noel himself stood back with his arms crossed at a safe distance. After all, he belonged to the weakest support class, known as the Eloquent. He and his group were battling lesser vampires, a subspecies incapable of using magical abilities. The queen of these beings could reproduce more of them endlessly. For this reason, Noel warned the group to stay alert. Even though these vampires were offspring of the main body, they could still tear a bull apart with their bare hands. One of these creatures, despite having its torso nearly split in half, attacked Noel while he was distracted, but Tanya quickly eliminated it, pointing out that they needed to aim for the head. Otherwise, the vampires would regenerate as many times as needed. With that, the group continued their journey. Walter questioned why they didn't go straight for the queen instead of wasting time with the minions, since killing the source would prevent the vampires from reproducing. However, Noel explained that they couldn't do that because the mission was too tough for a C-rank team like theirs. But by defeating the others first, their chances of success against the queen would increase. Though he wasn't fully convinced, Walter accepted Noel's final decision because, as a member of the Blue Beyond, he believed that the team should function based on hierarchy. According to him, the only reason they were on a B-rank mission despite being C-rank was thanks to Noel's skills and charisma. Noel reflected that the Eloquent class was a specialized support class, capable of summoning words with enhancement effects, boosting the group's abilities. However, their combat strength was the weakest there was. Relying on others for survival, the Eloquents were considered the most fragile class of all. After this reflection, to everyone's surprise, the vampire queen suddenly appeared, releasing a cloud of poisonous gas. Lloyd asked Tanya to provide support while he searched for Noel, but the vampire attacked the girl, knocking her down. Enraged, Walter swung his axe at the enemy but missed. In the midst of the smoke, Noel coughed uncontrollably, growing weaker by the second. Meanwhile, his companions couldn't stand up to the enemy without the Eloquent's buffs. Walter shouted, asking if this was how Noel planned to become an Eloquent. These words of challenge took the boy's mind back to memories of his childhood, when his grandfather died before his eyes. With this image in his head, Noel refused to let anyone underestimate him. That feeling sparked a strange glow in his eyes, prompting him to act swiftly, pulling out a pistol and charging toward the vampire queen. Without delay, he invoked his eloquence technique and initiated a strategy called Tactician. With this buff, by giving orders to the group, Noel increased each member's abilities by 25%. He immediately alerted the two frontline fighters to dodge an area attack that was about to hit. As predicted, everything unfolded as Noel had said, and Walter and Lloyd avoided the strike. Then the support used Battle Voice, raising the team's resistance and mana by 25%. He ordered Tanya to deploy shields for the two warriors while they attacked. The tactic worked, and the monster suffered severe damage. But Tanya noticed more vampires gathering around, fearing they would assist the queen. Faced with this situation, Noel cast the Mental Clarity peer support spell to stabilize the mage's mind and restore her will to fight. After that, Noel set a 74-second countdown on his watch and declared that he would handle the weaker foes while the others should focus on the main body. Tanya needs to keep providing shields for the allies while Lloyd and Walter must dodge the queen's attacks as they prepare their best strikes. With the wolf's howl, the Eloquent stuns several vampires and readies his magic weapon, Silver Flame, to freeze other enemies with the ice bullet. One of the vampires manages to escape, and Noel only has one bullet left, not to mention the 43 seconds left on the countdown he had set on his watch. By his calculations, the vampire's claws will pierce him at the 28-second mark, so he casts the Chain Plan Assault command and orders Walter and Lloyd to activate their attack skills against the queen. Lloyd prepares his Aura Blade and Walter uses Deadly Drive. At that moment, the queen's head is struck, but as they celebrate, Tanya and the others see Noel narrowly avoiding being impaled by the vampire that attacked him. Internally, the Eloquent muses that when the main body dies, its kind stop moving too. As the countdown reaches 0, the enemy leader's death is confirmed and the lesser vampire loses its mobility. Noel remains intact and Blue Beyond's mission is complete. The group members berate the support for the recklessness of his strategy, but the boy cracks his smile, remembering when he used to cry to his grandfather for being in the weakest class of all. One day, Brandon had said the boy was just like his mother, but unlike her, he had a talent for being a seeker, just like his grandfather. Even though he was an Eloquent, Brandon promised to train his grandson until he became the greatest seeker of all. Finally, Brandon asked for the boy's trust. On the way out of the dungeon, Noel looks up the sky and says he trusts his grandfather and that he will become the greatest, even surpassing Overdeath despite being in the weakest class. Later, the group arrives in Yttria, the imperial capital of the Velmet Empire, a city that thrived thanks to magic engineering. Though Velmet's lands are more vulnerable to the abyss than others, it was the scientific collection and use of beasts' items that provided the material necessary for the empire to become what it is today, making this the kingdom's main trade activity. Heater Seekers are admired by the entire population for their fight against the abyss creatures. Noel became a seeker at 15 and moved to Yttria in search of companions because an Eloquent cannot fight alone. Among them are Walter, the warrior, Tanya, the healer, and Lloyd, swordsman and team leader. Reflecting on this in a tavern after the mission, Noel thinks it would be even better to have an observer in the group, but decides to focus on gaining experience with his current team. Walter interrupts the boy's introspection, assuming he's upset about the payment received for the items dropped in the mission. He tells him not to worry too much about that because his seeker shouldn't be so concerned with money, and his grandfather probably would have said the same. Speaking of which, the Eloquent recalls that Brandon said quite the opposite, that a seeker should always have the best equipment possible to face challenges. According to the seasoned warrior, notoriety is an honor for seekers, and the boy should never be ashamed if others look down on his well-crafted armor. Moreover, Noel should never let anyone underestimate him. Remembering this, the boy arrogantly ends the argument with Walter, which irritates the warrior, who claims the Eloquent is going to tear the group apart with attitude. Noel doesn't back down and keeps provoking the big guy, drawing everyone's attention in the tavern. He says Walter thinks too highly of himself just because he's 2 years older, while Walter retorts that the kid only hides behind the team and gives orders. Noel mocks the fact that his companion acts like a battle god, prompting the big guy to grab the Eloquent by the collar, promising to kill him. Noel challenges him to a fight, but Lloyd steps in to break it up. After the commotion, the Blue Beyond team gathers in a square and laments the small amount of money left after expeditions due to high expenses. Lloyd tries to console everyone, saying a great opportunity will come, but Noel points out that well-paid missions are rare, and unlike clans that receive government jobs, Blue Beyond is a third-party group, so they have to pay a high commission to the contractor. For this reason, Noel suggests they use all their money to form their own clan. Lloyd reminds them they only have 13 million fills, while the government charges 20 million for that, so the Eloquent offers to cover the rest because it's crucial for them to form a clan. After all, the Empire encourages the growth of seekers, as they are the people's heroes. And since Blue Beyond has youth, beauty, and charisma among its members, they'll surely attract sponsors. With that said, Walter agrees they need to speed up the process because he wants fame, money, and women as soon as possible. Tanya opposes the idea, thinking the team isn't experienced enough for such a big step. So Lloyd is left with the final vote, but Noel warns that if they decide not to start the clan, he'll leave the group. As he said when they first formed, he has a big dream of becoming greater than Overdieth and can't give up on this plan. With those words, Lloyd agrees to form a clan and schedules a meeting 2 days later at his house to discuss the details. With that settled, everyone parts ways, except for Tanya and Lloyd, who remain together in the square. However, later on, Noel and Walter discover they've been betrayed by the rest of the team. Both the leader and the healer are leaving the city quietly. Later, Noel discovers through a letter that Lloyd made terrible investments and got into debt, which is why he took all the group's money to pay what he owed and fled the city before everything came to light. After reading this, the eloquent bursts into laughter without any restraint, leaving Walter furious at his partner's carefree behavior. Noel explains that he couldn't help but laugh upon learning about the humiliating downfall of the great Lloyd. Then he asks Walter where he got the letter. The big guy explains that he found it in the former leader's lodgings because he heard about a good job at the tavern earlier that morning and went to notify the 2 runaways before anyone else could. But when he arrived, the room was empty and the lodging owner handed him the letter. According to the owner, Lloyd left the previous night around 8 p.m. Knowing this, Noel concludes that they fled just before Atrey's gates closed for the night. Considering it's now 9:30, it's been 12 hours since their escape. Noel's plan is to check the records of the 2's departure and find out which gate they used. Most likely, Lloyd and Tanya didn't rent a horse to avoid leaving tracks, so Noel and Walter could catch up to them if they did. Regardless, all the big guy wants is to give their ex-boss a beating. It'd be one of those soul-satisfying beatdowns. Once the man finishes speaking, Noel gets real, explaining that this is a definitive betrayal, meaning that if they find the fugitives, they'll fight back and it'll probably be a fight to the death. Both Lloyd and Tanya are formidable opponents, so it wouldn't be smart to think this is an easy win, especially because there's emotional attachment between the 4 members. To make matters worse, even if they win this dispute, Noel and Walter won't be able to recover the money, which is exactly why the other 2 fled, pretending it was a romantic escape. With that said, Noel assures that he'll pay them back 100-fold for what they've done. Afterward, the duo heads to the Orcs Club. As soon as they enter the establishment, Noel announces to all the Seekers that their former companions from the Blue Beyond, Lloyd and Tanya, have fled the city with the group's money. Anyone who captures them alive will receive a reward of 2 million Phil. Walter questions why the Eloquent is doing this, and Noel explains that it's much easier to have a bunch of people roaming the area looking for the runaways. Soon, a member of the Lightning Bite group volunteers to go after the fugitives, asks the boy offering the reward for the details, and sets off with the rest of his team. Following their lead, other tavern goers also express interest in the job. After several leave to begin the search, a man shows up saying he knows where Lloyd and Tanya went but doesn't want to give the information for free. Imagining that this older man's group probably isn't capable of going toe-to-toe with his former colleagues, Noel offers him 1 million, but the informant asks for 1.5 million. The protagonist sticks to his initial offer while analyzing that this man is an old seeker who can no longer find work and is in desperate poverty. Indeed, the seeker gives up on raising the price and tells them he saw the pair of fugitives passing by Varley's Road, exiting through the south gate. Their likely destination is Carnot Village. With this information, Noel asks the informant to gather his group and meet him at the south gate. Walter will accompany the informant while Noel himself needs to take care of something before the meeting. Once everything is taken care of, the Eloquent reunites with his partner and the others. Walter asks if Noel is sure he can face Lloyd and Tanya, and the boy assures him he'd kill them both without a hint of mercy. After all, he always knew what he'd do if he were betrayed by friends on his journey. One of the men from the other group asks if the Eloquent never trusted his friends, and he responds that trusting isn't the same as having blind faith. Then he tells Walter he can wait in the city, prompting the big guy to grumble that he's being called weak. Thinking to himself, Noel considers that in reality, the big guy has a soft heart, and if he's not fully committed to the upcoming fight, it will undoubtedly be a painful experience for him. Later in the afternoon, Lloyd suggests they rest for the night and continue walking in the morning. Seeing that Tanya is very worried, he asks her to relax because once Noel realizes he can't get the money back, he won't care. Just as Lloyd finishes that sentence, Noel himself appears behind them with his companions using a stun howl to subdue the pursued. Walter nearly loses it and almost punches Lloyd in the face, but Noel tells his partner to calm down, stating he understands the former leader's motive from the letter, but he wants to know what he did with the lesser vampire's bounty. Lloyd confesses that he used it to pay off another debt, leading the protagonist to deduce that the investments mentioned in the letter were a lie and that Lloyd squandered all the money to pay off gambling debts. Upon hearing this, Walter becomes even more furious, knowing the guy spent all the money they risked their lives to get. At that moment, Lloyd yells that the two have no idea what it's like to be a leader, He didn't want to spend that money, but when he realized he was already drowning in debt, moreover, he believes his former companions have no right to criticize him since they left Lloyd to bear the burden of leadership, but now they want the privileges when it's convenient for them. However, as the man speaks, Noel kicks him in the face and reminds him that Lloyd wanted to be the leader. Now, after losing all the group's money to gambling, he still wants to play the victim. As he grants, the eloquent delivers several more kicks to his former companion, who begins begging Noel to stop. At this point, Walter looks away, not wanting to see the scene, and shifts uncomfortably. The other group present is left in awe of the boy's determination to punish the ex-leader, while Tanya also pleads for the violence to stop. Noel asks if the woman wants to take the kicks from her friend and promises he won't hold back just because she's a woman. The protagonist then uses Confess, an ability that forces the girl to tell the truth. She admits that she also bet with Lloyd and spent the group's money, but blames him, arguing that she could have made a fortune if he hadn't stopped her from gambling. Upon hearing the truth, Noel lifts the spell and Tanya complains that it's illegal to use mind control spells for personal gain. However, Noel counters, explaining that it's allowed when the goal is to make a criminal confess a crime which had just happened. As a result, Tanya and Lloyd are either headed for prison or will face 10 years of forced labor, which is typically the punishment for their kind of crime. Seeing the situation under control, the informant approaches Noel, asking for his reward. When the boy hesitates, the old man grabs his wrist, warning him not to be deceived. At that moment, the eloquent knocks the man to the ground, calling him a failed seeker with ridiculous equipment. When the old man responds by drawing his sword, Noel lands a punch to his stomach, almost killing him. This move reminds Noel of his childhood, when his father delivered a similar blow and explained that it causes a cardiac concussion in the opponent, rendering even the most powerful fighter unconscious. Unlike other classes, eloquence can't cast self-enhancing spells, which is why mastering such techniques is crucial. At that moment, an incredibly luxurious carriage appears on the road, and from its steps an eccentric noble named Finocchio Barzini, a well-known slaver in the region. He asks Noel if he took long, while the eloquent reflects that this man is a subordinate of the most powerful mafia family in the imperial capital, the Lucianos. Finocchio is both refined and vulgar, cheerful and cruel, a true two-faced character. That's why people call him the Mad Clown. Walter asks if this is what Noel had been planning. Noel replies that Lloyd and Tanya probably had no money, so he struck a deal with Finocchio to recover the lost funds by selling the two as slaves to the mafia. Otherwise, they would be handed over to the military police and forced into 10 years of labor, of which only 2% of criminals survive. With that, Finocchio assesses his potential purchase at 6 million fil. Noel protests that the amount is far too low. The slaver explains that the timing is terrible, as the Church of the Holy Cross is about to issue a decree of poverty, meaning the wealthy will have to cut back on luxuries, as spending too much on something like this would draw the church's ire. Noel questions if even the capital's most powerful mafia can't go against the church, and Finocchio confirms this. Still, the eloquent stands his ground, raising the price of the pair to 11 million. Finocchio is thrown off by the audacity, and the price climbs to 12. As the Mad Clown continues his tantrum, the value shoots up to 15 million fil. Finocchio asks if the boy wants to become pig feet, to which Noel promises to tell everyone that the slaver bought the pair for 30 million, not 15. This would give the impression that the two were highly valuable, and considering they were both attractive young individuals, Finocchio Barzini could easily sell them later for up to 90 million. Recognizing Noel's cleverness, the mobster offers him a leadership position in his family, but Noel immediately refuses and asks, so what will it be? Finocchio accepts the deal but warns the boy never to pull such a stunt again. Then he orders the old man to keep his mouth shut about everything he just witnessed unless he wants his family to become pig feed. As Lloyd is being hauled away and the traitor receives his payment, Tanya begs for mercy, reminding Noel that they had always been companions. But Noel responds, companions don't gamble with other people's money, and a traitor will always be a traitor. Hearing this, Tanya falls into despair, pleading with Walter for help, exploiting his feelings for her. When that doesn't work, she insults him, calling him useless. Before boarding his carriage, Finocchio comments on how frightening women can be, then bids Noel farewell. The eloquent pays the old seeker who tries to insult him, saying Noel is only good for giving enhancements. Noel retorts that the old man's insults are as pathetic as he is, and that he should take lessons from Tanya. As he turns to leave, the man calls him a devil. Noel reflects that seekers hunt beasts to survive, so being called a devil by a seeker is the highest form of resentment. In Noel's case, he intends to wear that title with pride, aiming to become the strongest in the world. The next day, back in Atria, Noel gives a bottle of liquor to Walter as a parting gift, as the warrior had decided the night before in a tavern that he would no longer be a seeker, due to his emotional fragility. Though Noel had tried to persuade him to stay, the man had already made up his mind. The bottle symbolized their farewell. After Noel left, Walter wondered if the bastard even had a heart, especially since Tanya had loved him, yet he had never shown any interest. In the end, all Noel cared about was becoming stronger, which made him the group's only special member. With that, Walter took a sip from the bottle, calling Noel his best friend. Meanwhile, the Eloquent contemplated his return to square one, deciding he must be like a snake, shedding its skin to grow stronger. With that in mind, he planned to rebuild the Blue Beyond. The next day, somewhere in the capital of Etreia, a girl finally tracks down Noel Stalin. Meanwhile, Noel is trying to interview potential new members for his clan, but Wolf won't leave him alone, insisting that any seeker worth their salt is already part of the clan. To that, Noel tells him to stop being such a nuisance, but Wolf is convinced he knows the best path for the Eloquent one. So he invites the protagonist to join his group of the Lightning Bite. That said, Noel reflects that this group, besides the swordsman and leader Wolf, also has an elven archer named Licia along with other very talented members. Even among rank C groups, they are one of the most promising newcomers. Wolf adds that Noel would make more money by joining him than by trying to recruit new members. Speaking of members, Licia asks her boss to stop bothering the Eloquent, throwing in his face that it's probably because of this kind of persistence that the florist turned him down earlier. Wolf complains that she's revealing personal details for no reason, but eventually, Noel accepts the proposal on one condition. He must become the leader of Lightning Bite. Without hesitation, the rest of the group makes it clear they agree with this idea, but the current leader is completely against it. After all, he was the one who founded the clan. Suddenly, a female figure approaches the protagonist at the tavern, and Noel is impressed that she managed to get so close without being noticed, especially since Licia is a specialist in observation. Her name is Alma, and she came after seeing Noel's announcement on a wall. Noel wants to know how old the girl is since minors aren't allowed to become seekers, and she claims to be 21. Soon, the entire Lightning Bite group surrounds the girl, asking her all sorts of personal questions like her hobbies or favorite book. Unfazed, Alma answers each question without blinking until Noel asks about her class and rank. Alma says she's a reconnaissance class, rank C. Noel knows that having a reconnaissance expert in an abyss, along with a talented archer in detection and observation, is a huge advantage. Now more intrigued, he asks why the girl wants to be a seeker, but she explains that she doesn't. In fact, she's only interested in Noel because he's the grandson of Overdieth, as her grandfather fought against him in the past, and it was during that battle that her relative lost his arm. Concerned, Noel wonders if the girl is seeking revenge, but she assures him that she wouldn't waste her time with something so pointless. She only wanted to see what kind of seeker the grandson of such a hero had become. Even so, Noel apologizes if his grandfather caused any harm, but Alma doesn't think an apology is necessary as her grandfather died last month. Speaking of which, Noel asks for the name of her grandfather and she reveals it's Alcor Judicali. Upon hearing that name, everyone around them is shocked. Noel remembers that this man was part of the Assassin Society, a group willing to kill anyone for money. Alcor was the founder and first leader, a legendary assassin. At that moment, a man named Logan approaches Alma after overhearing the conversation, sarcastically noting that if her claim to be Alcor's granddaughter is a joke, it's not funny. Wolf says it's none of the intruder's business, but Logan is determined to continue his speech. He adds that seeker taverns have unwritten rules where only seekers of a certain prestige are allowed. Since Alma admits she didn't know about these rules, the man warns her that regulars usually deal harshly with anyone who breaks this code of conduct. Alma interrupts the chatterbox to ask Noel what exactly determines a seeker's prestige. Noel replies that to start, it's class and rank. After that, it's a strength anyone can recognize. In that case, Alma concludes she just needs to beat this Ludmouth to gain recognition, and Logan gets angry at being challenged by this kid. He tries to punch her, but Alma dodges with incredible speed, lands a strike to his face, and then delivers a downward kick that connects squarely with his head. With that, Noel wastes no time and hires the girl. Without responding directly to the offer, Alma's stomach growls, and she admits she's suddenly very hungry. Later, while eating a fried pastry Noel gave her, Alma remarks that she's never tasted anything so delicious in these mountains. The boy admits he didn't really believe her story about being Alcor's granddaughter. Alma responds that the moment she laid eyes on Noel, she immediately believed he was Overdith's grandson because the young man's eyes told her he was willing to do whatever it takes to reach the top. Speaking of which, Alma recalls that her grandfather once advised her never to fight over death because he was unpredictable and incomprehensible, and no one stood a chance against him. For some reason, Noel's eyes reminded Alma of those words. Noel asks if the girl was training to become an assassin in the mountains, and she confirms that she was trying to advance from reconnaissance to assassin and beyond, even though she hasn't officially reached rank B yet, though she has met the requirements. Given that, Noel doesn't understand why she didn't join the Assassin Society, since it should be easy with her skill set. Alma admits that was the plan, until the day she was pitted against another assassin during training. In this simulated duel, her opponent showed some potential, but Alma didn't find it too difficult to dodge every attack and counter effectively, eventually subduing him and pointing a dagger at his chest. Desperate, the man reminded her that it was just a test. Alma then recalled a lesson from her grandfather. The strongest survive, and the weak offer their lives to the god of hell. The man argued that those beliefs were from the past, before the new leader of the organization, as those sinister traditions no longer existed. Still, none of that mattered to Alma. She was taught differently. Just as she raised her dagger to finish him off, she was stopped by a man named Simon Gregory, the current leader of the organization. Because of that incident, Alma was expelled and could never rejoin the society, as she embodied an outdated behavior that was no longer desired. This organization has changed a lot, to the point where it's on the verge of becoming a state institution, shifting its focus from executions to espionage, since the new leader believes that will secure the future of the society. Noel feels anxious about being targeted for knowing this story, but Alma reassures him that she'll protect the boy, referring to herself as his older sister. Later, as they walk together through the forest, Noel asks what Alma knows about support classes and enhancements. She explains that they are weak on their own but provide support capable of turning the tide of battle. Regarding this, Noel points out that buffs have a wide range of effects. For instance, there's the Eloquence Assault Command ability. While it can end a fight in the blink of an eye if used incorrectly, it could lead your own group to death. That's why the one providing the enhancement must analyze the entire battle before acting, and the commands should always aim to get the best out of each companion on the battlefield. Another important detail is that Eloquentes can enhance themselves, which is why they can't manage on their own. Alma comments that Noel is capable of that, to which he responds that if he weren't, he'd have died long ago. Upon reaching their destination, Noel asks Alma to catch a monster for him. After all, the flora and fauna had mutated due to the abyss, and although they're not as dangerous as wild beasts, they shouldn't be underestimated. Today, Alma is after a killer rabbit, a horned iron rabbit monster, after receiving a buff from the Eloquent. She thinks she doesn't need help, so Noel explains that Alma must have the Excel ability, being a recon class, a technique that allows her to accumulate speed until it reaches 5 times her normal pace. However, it took her a long time to adjust her body to this type of ability, or else she would have broken bones and muscles by overusing it. That said, knowing the body must adapt to the buffs received, the Eloquent wants to see how compatible Alma is with his support spells, as the outcome of this will determine their plans moving forward. Thus, Noel casts Battle Voice and Tactician on her, then asks her to push Axel to its limit, increasing her speed from 5 to 6 times. The test will be complete if Alma can catch at least 1 rabbit in under 10 seconds. Without delay, she embarks on the mission and captures several rabbits along the way, impressed by what an Eloquent can do. In the end, she returns before the time limit, bringing back 13 killer rabbits. Noel counts 8.6 seconds until the Recon class returns, and the leader is astonished at how easily she adapted to the buff on her first try. Regardless, the training is deemed complete, and Noel feels confident enough to take on their mission as a group. He then shows a letter from a small town where they had cleared out monsters. According to the letter, a group of thieves had appeared near Mint's village. This will be the first job for the reborn Blue Beyond. Soon after, the team heads to the village in a carriage, which Alma is thrilled about since she's never ridden in one before. Noel cuts her joy short, assuring her it's only fun at the beginning, and that the trip to Minsk will be irritatingly long. Since they'll have plenty of time, he mentions the various tasks seekers handle aside from slaying monsters that appear from the abyss. There are monster hunts, which involve hunting down creatures, crime hunts, which means tracking down and capturing criminals, as well as treasure hunts, and finally, mythic hunts, which involve exploring unknown territories. Problems with criminals, like the one Blue Beyond is about to deal with, are typically the responsibility of the local lord, but they can be too slow to act and villages might be destroyed before help arrives. In those cases, lords can request assistance from seekers. This particular contract comes from a poor farming village, so they likely won't get a reward, but this mission will be a test. Hearing this, Alma gets excited about defeating the bad guys threatening the innocent villagers, and Noel feels grateful for her enthusiasm as it reminds him of a similar moment with his former group. At one point during the journey, the group stops in Eudora for the night, and Alma complains about how stiff she feels. Tomorrow morning, they'll swap carriages and continue to Minsk. The first order of business is to find lodging, but it proves to be the toughest challenge of the adventures so far, as every place they go has no available rooms. After much effort, they finally secure a room, and Noel lets Alma have the bed while he sleeps on the floor. Alma asks why they can't sleep together, a question that flusters the boy, prompting him to stick to his decision. When he steps out of the bath without a shirt, his companion remarks that it takes a lot of hard work to achieve a body like his, but no matter how much Noel pushes himself, he'll never compare to frontline fighters because hard work doesn't surpass talent. If Noel were a warrior like Overdeath, he might become the ultimate seeker, but that's not the case. Hearing each word, Noel asks her to close her eyes and without warning touches her forehead. As he lies down to sleep, he reflects on Alma's words, acknowledging that he knows all too well what she meant, as in his childhood he ended up with the weakest class and needed his grandfather's training just to become remotely strong. And speaking of the girl, Noel suddenly wakes up after almost being suffocated by her, as she was dreaming about cakes. Frustrated, he savagely hopes she'll suffocate in them. The next day, the mayor welcomes the Blue Beyond group after a year without seeing them, but he's surprised when he realizes only 2 people are standing in front of him. Noel explains that the other 3 members retired and now it's just him and Alma. Still, the mayor has nothing to worry about because the pair will deal with these thieves today, according to the new team leader. Inside the house, the mayor's wife serves tea to the visitors until Noel notices a young girl hiding when she realizes she's been seen. The mayor explains that her name is Chelsea, that she's going through a tough phase and was excited to reunite with Blue Beyond. Noel remarks that she must be disappointed since their handsome leader isn't here anymore. But in truth, the girl admires Noel more than Lloyd, though no one knows that. Next, the protagonist reviews the mission details. The letter the mayor sent mentioned a group of 20 thieves who had already attacked a nearby village and caused some casualties. Besides robbing houses, they also kidnapped the women. Noel wants to know if the bandits' hideout has been found, and the village leader says it's in a rocky clearing in the eastern forest. Regarding payment, Noel says he needs $200,000 up front and $300,000 after completing the mission. To his surprise, the mayor quickly pays the initial amount, which startles Noel, who thought the man would try to bargain. Looking at the bag of money, the boy had the impression that the community leader struggled to gather such a sum. Regardless, Noel announces that the mission will be done and awaits the rest of the payment. Far from the mayor's house, Alma comments that the bald pervert was staring at her right in front of his wife and daughter. Suddenly, the mayor's daughter runs up to them, asking if he'll really defeat the bandits. With a friendly smile, Noel Stalin assures her that he'll put an end to this nightmare soon. Excited, the girl says she's rooting for him and shows the bamboo dragonfly she's holding. Noel remembers teaching her how to make it when he was there, and the girl adds that the ones she makes now fly higher than the other kids, and that she keeps the dragonfly Noel gave her as a treasure. Embarrassed, she runs off, saying she hopes for his safe return. After this exchange, Alma comments that Stalin has a cute face, but is a scoundrel for having that girl wrapped around his finger. Not in the mood for this, Noel tells Alma to shut up, and they continue on their way. By nightfall, they arrive at the bandits' hideout and realize there are far more than 20 of them, possibly double what the mayor had mentioned. Observing closely, Noel thinks he's figured out who their leader is and recalls seeing him somewhere before. Soon he recognizes him as Razor the Fat, a wanted man with a 2 million filled bounty, a B-rank bandit specializing in reconnaissance. With that, Noel asks if Alma can take this guy down, and she replies that in a one-on-one fight it'd be a breeze, but the problem will be if the others surround her. On that note, Noel assures her that he'll handle the rest, though Alma didn't know how he would since she had the ability to conceal her presence while he did not. However, Noel had already thought of that and reveals his plan to his teammate. Alma quickly infiltrates the enemy camp using her stealth ability. With the link technique, which allows for shared thoughts, Noel gets updates from her as she moves through the camp. Shortly after, she reaches the leader's tent and waits for the signal to attack. Noel then unleashes the stun howl, paralyzing all the bandits in the vicinity. He orders Alma to take down Razor the Fat. She uses a quick attack, piercing through the tent and driving her dagger through the leader's torso. With the boss confirmed dead, the next order is to keep the enemies busy until Noel arrives. One by one, the henchmen fall to Alma's blade, and watching this, Noel notes that she seems to take a strange pleasure in it, something that could become a problem in the future. As Alma counts each man she kills, Stalin arrives and announces that he's joining the fight with a flash grenade. True to his word, he blinds the opponents with the grenade and then fires off some flame bullets, setting off a large fire that spreads quickly, engulfing the bandits. Sometime later, the mayor once again greets Blue Beyond with joy, asking if the bandits were killed. Noel Stalin confirms that he killed them all and shows the group's leader. He asks if the mayor wants to see inside, but the mayor declines for now. Regardless, the eloquent one requests the rest of his payment, and the community leader invites the duo to dine first, saying his wife and daughter have prepared a feast for them. Inside, Chelsea mentions that she'd like to be an incredible seeker, like Noel, and wonders if she's capable of it. Stalin replies that any adult is capable and that she should enroll in the training school in Etrel, a government-run institution with a 2-year course for frontliners and a 1-year course for those working behind the scenes. However, the government doesn't cover living expenses, so she'd have to manage that herself. Speaking of which, Noel suggests that she could gain experience as a support, though it's not a common path. Supports essentially handle tasks for seekers and get the chance to observe professionals up close. Enthralled, Chelsea asks if she could join Blue Beyond once she becomes a strong seeker, and Noel replies that if she indeed becomes skilled and he's still an inspiration to her, then without a doubt, they'll fight together. Then the mayor and his wife bring out a bottle of wine worth 100,000 fil to celebrate the occasion, something the man had saved for a special event like this. As he picks up his glass, Noel assumes it must be a wine of exceptional quality based on its color and aroma, but he insists he can't take the first sip of such an exquisite wine. He urges the host to do the honors and lead the celebration. Upon hearing this, the mayor's expression turns suspicious, and he starts to fumble his words, so Stalin cuts straight to the point and asks the man to take a sip of the wine he poisoned. At that moment, the mayor is shocked and asks why he would do such a thing. Noel calmly responds that the old man wouldn't have to pay Blue Beyond if its members died, plus he could steal their money and equipment. The mayor grows even more agitated and demands to know what grounds there are for these accusations. Noel presents 3 reasons. First, a man who lies about the number of bandits to lower the reward wouldn't open a bottle worth 100,000 fil out of generosity. Second, this wine is cheap, and Noel can tell by the smell that it's starting to spoil, which means it's been open for a while, unlike the story the man told about saving it for this moment. Lastly, Noel sensed the mayor's bloodlust as soon as he started talking about the wine. Alma questions how the man thought he could fool the two of them with such a ridiculous act, especially considering the trick wouldn't even work since the Recon class builds up poison tolerance. After hearing these accusations, the host loses his composure, emphasizing that no one has any proof against him. Once again, Noel urges him to take the first sip of the wine if there's nothing wrong. However, the man knocks over the glass and screams for the guests to leave the village. At that point, Noel uses his confessed magic to force the man to reveal the whole truth. He admits to poisoning the wine to kill Blue Beyond after the bandits were dealt with and to steal the group's valuables and gear. Upon hearing this, Chelsea is in shock, asking if her father really intended to kill Noel and her. But before any response, Stalin strikes the host, hitting him in the right eye. Afterward, he makes it clear that he won't stop there, while the mayor begs for forgiveness and promises to pay the 300,000 he owes. Yet Noel responds that if the mayor wants to live, he'll have to give every last coin he owns. When the man claims he has debts to pay, Noel looms over him like a snake, drawing closer to his left eye, threatening to take his sight. The mayor screams that he borrowed the money from the Gambino family, a mafia that will kill him if the payment is delayed. Even so, Noel makes it clear that he doesn't care and continues to threaten the man. In a panic, Chelsea brings out 820,000, the total sum the family possesses, to give to the seeker. Her father calls her a fool, warning that the Gambinos will kill them all if they don't have the money, but the girl pushes forward and hands the cash to Noel. With that, Noel accepts the payment and calls Alma to leave, while Chelsea cries out in anger, screaming that she hates all the seekers. Noel, however, ignores her and walks away. On the way back, Alma comments on how tough life is for the seekers. Noel asks if she's tired of the routine. She says no, but she wonders if he's really okay with everything that just happened. Coldly, he assures her he is. Alma then remarks that he's lost the admiration of a girl who once cared so much for him. And that's bad, no matter how you look at it. But the eloquent makes it clear, if he were afraid of disappointing people, he'd have stayed on a deserted island. At that moment, the two spot an airship in the sky bearing the Goat Dinner clan's symbol. Noel explains that this symbol carries the 3-star regalia, meaning the clan is recognized by the Empire. He goes on to clarify that there are 7 regalia clans ranked by their achievements. From bottom to top, there are 4 3-star regalia clans, 2 2-star regalia clans, and 1 1-star regalia clan. The right to own an airship is one of the privileges of the regalia. In fact, that airship is likely carrying some of the smartest, wealthiest, and most brilliant minds in society. Noel Stalin's plan is to reach that level of prestige within a year. Upon hearing his ambitions, Alma recalls an old test she once took where Simon Gregory asked if she killed Alcor Judicalo, the former leader of the Assassin Society. Alma admits it was easy since the man was already very old. Simon notes that Alcor sought power and was a reaper in human form, but he could never surpass the Overdeath, and that failure consumed him. Simon then asks if Alma is really Alcor's daughter, and she reveals that she was born from a woman he kidnapped from a village. Alcor never wanted children, he wanted someone to be just like him. By creating in Alma an invincible version of himself, he believed he could erase his defeat to the Overdeath. Because of this delusion, all Alma's siblings died except her. Despite the supposed success of his pupil on this insane journey, Simon tells her that she has no place in the assassin society anymore because it's no longer as violent as it used to be. At that moment, Alma is devastated, realizing she wasted 21 years training to become something that no longer mattered. As a consolation, Simon reveals that the Overdeath's grandson has become an eloquent seeker in the capital, which is the weakest of all classes. His name is Noel Stalin. After recalling that moment, Alma Judicali embraces her teammate, vowing that she'll always fight by his side. Next, we're taken to a public bathroom where a man is dragged into one of the stalls. After knocking out an officer, the man who caused this violence grabs his hat and transforms into the fallen man. As he exits the bathroom, another officer asks if the rookie's stomach is better, to which he replies, yes. Having said that, he returns to his post guarding a cell where a prisoner sentenced to death resides. This prisoner is the murderer who left Yttria, the Empire's capital, trembling with fear. His name is Hugo Capilius, the puppet master. Meanwhile, Noel has just completed 2 laps around the castle walls, carrying a barrel filled with rocks that add to the weight of the exercise. He has a 2-hour time limit to complete this route, which is already part of his daily routine. No matter how tired he is, Noel Stalin is always determined to finish. Years ago, when he was still trained by his grandfather, the Overdeath pushed his grandson's persistence to the utmost because, according to him, the beasts won't wait for you. This intense training began the day the young man declared he would become a seeker. Since then, his kind grandfather was no longer there, replaced by an implacable and extremely demanding tutor who imposed a grueling exercise routine on the boy. Eloquents like Noel don't have the power to strengthen themselves, and if they want to survive as seekers, all they can do is endure cruel training. In a way, even though it was a routine filled with brutality, Noel kept standing day after day, and some remnants of his grandfather's kindness could still be seen during exchanges of smiles between the two. Years later, with a physique that resulted from that grueling period, Noel reflects in the bath on the words of Alma Judicali. On that occasion, she praised the young eloquent's physique, but still regretted that no matter how much he trains, he will never compare to the frontline fighters because hard work doesn't reach talent. However, the woman not only expressed her desire to touch the man's body, but did so without his permission and threw him onto the bed. Impatient, Noel wants to end this nonsense, but the former member of the Assassin Society uses her strength to stay on top of the young man. Mockingly, she claims that no younger brother can beat an older sister, and this joke is already wearing thin on Noel, because this girl insists on this sibling talk since they met. As Noel cannot overpower her, she jokes that he looks adorable when desperate and even asks for a kiss. Without getting a response, she proceeds with her plan, so Noel had to resort to a firm headbutt on the woman's forehead. Shortly after, Alma still complains that headbutting a woman isn't very gentlemanly, and that the most force that should have been applied was a flick or something of that sort. Anyway, Noel doesn't want to know about any fuss after the woman's unwarranted insistence. Alma says it's Noel's fault for being so cute, but he really doesn't understand this logic. Watching a happy couple arm in arm, Alma repeats the gesture of the strangers and links arms with Noel Stalin without prior warning. Having done this, she announces that she's on a date with the young man and wants to know where they are going. Noel replies that they'll start at the Assessor's Guild, because in Yttria, that's where you can evaluate your class and climb in rank. Once inside, the protagonist explains that Assessor is a special class, usually comprised of a group of gnomes who have an affinity for it, although they can't climb in rank. Honestly, Noel finds these gnomes a bit odd as they live only to research classes. He then asks Alma if she has the mark to climb in rank, and she explains that she does, because when you're about to climb, a mark like the one she's appears on your body, usually on the chest or back of the hand. However, Alma hopes that Noel's mark appears on his back because that is an appropriate place to receive a mark. As the two chat, nearby a gnome congratulates an adventurer for having climbed in class, and the young man celebrates and can already feel the power flowing through his body. Amid this, Noel wants to know if his companion will become an assassin, but since she hasn't decided yet, the girl's open to suggestions. Noel has no ideas but shows concern that the class chosen by her matches the new members that will arise in the Blue Beyond. Alma asks if he's really going to recruit more people, and he explains that at least one more member is needed, because just he and Alma can't go to the Abyss alone. Next, Noel guides Alma to a dwarven blacksmith he frequents because good equipment extracts the maximum potential from a seeker, and all equipment needs regular maintenance. Soon they arrive at their destination, where the dwarf notes that the Blue Beyond has a new member with quite striking physical features. After the blacksmith, they head to a bookstore specialized in skill books. After explaining to the attendant that Alma is a C-rank scout, he asks for an item that would be suitable. While the employee goes to look for it, Alma asks if Noel isn't going to look for something for himself, but he responds that skill books are categorized by class, so he will now go to the bookstore for eloquence. Before leaving, he makes it clear that his companion's budget is 1 million phil, and that she should buy books and not waste the money under any circumstances. With that said, it wasn't long before Judicali appeared, hugging her new giant teddy bear. But seeing the headache it caused the group's leader, she assured him that she hadn't spent all their money. After all, she had purchased the book Armor Piercing, a projectile skill that cuts the target's defense in half for 800,000 phil. Only afterward did she pick up the bear to hug instead of Noel, as a form of consolation for the bargain price of 200,000 phil. In other words, she spent exactly 1 million. It was the perfect purchase. By the way, she wanted to know what her companion had bought, but unfortunately, what he wanted was out of his budget. His desire was the Exorcism book, a skill from the Eloquence that could instantly eliminate the undead. However, the price tag for this item was 30 million phil, which is way out of Noel's reach for now. In the meantime, the boy saw someone passing by in a strange manner, so he got up and told his partner that he needed to take care of something. Thus, by following the mysterious figure to a dirty alley in the outskirts, Noel discovered that it was Loki. The Eloquent complained that they could have met somewhere else, because his clothes might get stinky, but Loki argued that he was in danger and couldn't be seen by anyone. During this, he handed over the information that Stalin wanted about the prisoner because he plans to recruit him for Blue Beyond. Noel is convinced that they set this guy up, which is why he paid Loki to investigate the case in which he is involved to prove his innocence. Loki thinks Noel is crazy for selling his former comrades as slaves and now recruiting a prisoner sentenced to death, but the protagonist takes it as a compliment. Changing the subject, the Eloquent praises another job well done by the man and mentions that it's no wonder he's known as Faithless. Being an imitator who copies people's forms, Loki ensures there's no place he can't infiltrate. Having said that, Noel pays the investigator and asks him to continue with the work. In good faith, Loki gives out an extra piece of information about the case. It seems there's a harmful substance circulating around that has a side effect of inducing uncontrollable rage, and the consumption of this substance has greatly increased the number of stabbings around a try. The dealers of this drug are linked to the Luciano family, although this region is controlled by the Gambino family, led by Albert Gambino. Meanwhile, Alma eats her steak with the strangest look possible and on the brink of hatred, until an old friend appears out of nowhere. Turning back to Noel, he reflects that the old boss of the Gambino family has died, so his son took over the business. While observing the misery around him in the outskirts, Stalin reflects that this is a tragedy because the old boss was a good man, so much so that even Finocchio Barzini respected him. He would never have allowed the sale of such a dangerous substance. Looking around, Noel sees a man with an unusual face for this region, so he wonders if he's an immigrant. Young as he is, he probably still had dreams and ambitions, but he must die as a beggar far from home. Regretting this fact, Noel leaves a coin for the young man. Then the beggar collects the money and warns that the Eloquent dropped it. Besides, he advises that this place is not safe for a pretty girl like Noel. Noel frowns at this remark and the man asks if it's a stomach ache. Thus, the Eloquent makes it clear that he is a man, which truly surprises the street guy. He explains that he wouldn't put a coin touched by someone dirty back into his pocket and then turns to leave. The unknown man runs after Noel for some reason but receives a kick in the stomach that knocks him down. Then Stalin asserts that the boy should know this place. After all, he is worth less than that silver coin. Hearing this, the assaulted man starts to see another man in Noel's demeanor, as if reliving a trauma. For this reason, he adopts a fighting stance, making Noel realize that this is no newbie. In the sequence, the protagonist is attacked but manages to dodge the blow and throws the opponent against the wall. Impressed, a stranger asks if Noel is a ninja. Then Noel considers that ninja is a subclass of reconnaissance that only exists in an island country in the Far East, hence he deduces that's where this man came from. At that moment, the stranger emanates an incredible power, making Noel consider that he would be a good acquisition for Blue Beyond. Then he explains to his rival that he is of the Eloquent class. But by this point, the swordsman was no longer concerned with that matter, although he was slightly surprised by this revelation. Soon, the two make it clear that they are going to fight seriously from now on, but they are interrupted by a little man named Miguel. Calling the beggar Koga, he reminds the guy that he asked him to behave. Meanwhile, Alma explains to her friend that she has 4 choices to rank up as reconnaissance. The frontline options are assassin and torturer, and the rearguard ones are pursuer and bandit. The evaluation guild said she has more affinity as assassin and pursuer, but her choice will depend on the other members of the group, as Noel rightly said. By the way, her friend imagines that Noel is recruiting new members at that moment because she saw a poster from Blue Beyond about it. As the two talk, Miguel orders his ring to painfully restrain Koga. Then Noel realizes that it is a vow of subordination between those two, a dark item that makes someone obey the ring's owner. The use of this item is illegal with only one exception. Miguel questions Noel, asking what such a beautiful girl is doing in these parts. Then the boy kicks the little man, throwing him far away, then points his gun at the man and asks what his story is. With no way to escape the armed man, Miguel explains that he came from Soldeland, a city to the south, exiled for running an illegal fighting ring for the D'Alembert family. He was caught stealing money from the boss, prompting his flight to the imperial capital where the D'Alemberts wouldn't pursue him since it's controlled by a more powerful family. Koga had been purchased as a gladiator and trained from scratch in Soldeland, then brought to fight in the underworld of Itrai, where Miguel plans to establish a new illegal combat market. Amidst this, Alma tells her friend that she's good enough to stand alone beside Noel, and if anyone else shows up at Blue Beyond, they would surely be killed. Faced with all this, Noel wonders if he should kill Miguel to take Koga for himself. Suddenly, a gunshot could be heard. However, the protagonist fired just above Miguel's head, telling him to disappear immediately before starting a 10-second countdown. Desperate, Miguel ran off, kicking Koga to wake him up and get moving as well. Amidst this, Noel pondered that this boy was a fool for not killing his oppressor and gaining his freedom, considering the strength he possessed. In truth, Noel didn't want a scrawny, practically dead stray dog, but rather a fierce wolf, which is why he allowed the swordsman to flee. Next, the eloquent returned to Alma and asked what Lisha was doing there. Without answering, she thanked him for the meal as if Noel was going to pay, but he made it clear he would not. The elf frowned, remarking that the boy didn't need to be so stingy, especially since he had left in the middle of their meeting without apologizing. Speaking of which, Alma was furious with him because if Lisha hadn't shown up, she would have dined alone. Consequently, he conceded and agreed to pay the bill, but only for today. Changing the subject, the elf wondered if the leader of Blue Beyond had found a new recruit, as his delay likely meant he was on the lookout for one. Despite the image of Koga in his mind, Noel preferred to say he hadn't found anyone truly worthwhile to join the team. Moreover, he had gone to gather information about a new, dangerous substance circulating in the area. Apparently, it provided a high but also left the user out of control, and since there was no control over who was distributing it, Noel wanted Lisha to be careful and to ask Wolf to do the same. For her part, the elf found it odd that this boy was concerned about her clan, but he insisted he wasn't worried, just sharing information with a colleague. Thus, Lisha pretended to understand and said her goodbyes to the others, as it was almost time for her to go to work. Before leaving, she invited Alma to a cafe with the tastiest sweets in the region, and this time they would go not as colleagues, but as friends. Moved, Alma replied that they were best friends now, so Licia got excited and tried to include Noel in the mix, but the boy bluntly told her to scram. With the elf's departure, the eloquent reflected that if she had heard about the substance, perhaps they had already begun distributing it outside Gambino's territory, and all he could hope was that it wouldn't cause trouble. Speaking of the influential mafia figure in the region, next we see Miguel facing Albert Gambino. The man found it pathetic that the thief had thought he could escape with his family's money, since the D'Alemberts had posted this wanted poster and asked for Papa Luciano to hand over the thief when found. Hearing this, Miguel realized he was in a tight spot, being in front of the cruelest man around, a true scoundrel and walking disaster. Despite the instructions, Gambino confessed that it wouldn't be so fun to simply hand over the wanted man, especially since that would be a favor to a plebeian gang like the D'Alemberts. At that moment, Miguel took the opportunity to brown-nose the boss, emphasizing that he was the rising star of the illustrious Luciano family and shouldn't take orders from such riff-raff. Pretending to fall for that talk, Gambino responded that even a half-man understands, and since the D'Alemberts didn't know how to use the little guy, Miguel desperately offered to work for the local mafia boss. However, Gambino announced that he would hand them over as if they were stuffed animals, that they would skin them alive, make ham and sausage from their guts, and then sell it to the D'Alemberts. Having said that, he instructed his assistant, Leos, to make the preparations. Meanwhile, Koba reflected that he would die like an animal after coming so far, but remembering what he had been through in his life, he thought that at least everything would end. Next, a debtor with an overdue debt entered Gambino's office, and this man was the mayor of the village of Mince. He explained that he had the money on hand, but a seeker named Noel Stalin had stolen everything he had. The mayor said he had tried to fight, but the seeker took his wife and daughter hostage and gouged out his right eye. To make matters worse, Noel had said that it's better to throw this money away than give it to the weak Gambino family. Hearing this, Albert guaranteed he would get justice on Stalin for what he had done and would wait for the mayor's payment, but considering that he had not kept his word and delayed the payment, Gambino wanted to keep his right arm. Thus, the boss emphasized that Koga belonged to the class of long sword swordsmen, a combat class capable of cutting better than anyone, so he ordered the boy to cut off the mayor's right arm with his cane. Immediately, Miguel ordered his servant to comply with Gambino's order while the boss himself bit into a stone and went crazy with a rush, getting high for this episode of violence. With everything ready, he demanded that the show begin, although the mayor assured that it was not possible to cut off someone's arm with that piece of wood. However, with a movement so swift that it was almost imperceptible, the swordsman did what was ordered and blood spurted all over the man's body, leaving the mafia boss ecstatic with the spectacle and praising Koga in every way. Miguel took the opportunity to sell his own fish, explaining that this boy was an undefeated champion in his old arena, came from the island nation of the Far East, the land of Vajra, and had been raised by him with much love. Yet, the merchant was willing to offer his servant to the mafia boss. Without a second thought, Gambino accepted the proposal. Later, after this bloody settling of accounts, Koga pondered that since he was born, he had become unnecessary to everyone. His father was a successful merchant, and his mother was a beautiful woman. Before he was born, all his parents wanted was to be blessed with an heir to the Tsukishima name, but instead, they were attacked by men who violated his mother's dignity. After that, her mental state completely deteriorated. 9 months later, seeing his wife giving birth to a child that might not be his, the supposed father of Koga doubted whether he was indeed responsible for creating this person, and this behavior led Koga's mother to take her own life beside him. As the years went by, no matter how hard the child tried to please his father, the man only scorned him and treated him with violence and detachment. Others around commented that Koga's mother should have taken her son with her, which led the boy to believe he was a cursed child, unwanted by anyone. One day, Koga woke up on a boat and realized he had been sold into slavery. It was then that he met Miguel, who introduced himself as his master. Carried into underground fights since his adolescence, the boy had to do whatever was necessary to survive. His need for acceptance was so deep and desperate that he was moved to tears when Miguel praised him for winning his fights. Ironically, it was through his oppressor that he heard his first compliment. To fulfill his desire to be accepted, Koga won fight after fight, earning a fortune for his boss. However, he was not a killing machine, quite the opposite. Despite having hardened in the insane routine of fights, he would wonder to himself if a slave could ever be more than this life he led. Returning to the present moment after Koga puts on armor, Leos asks if he is ready. At night, Loki calls Noel for a meeting away from the population to tell him that the Gambino family is after the eloquent, believing the lying words of the mayor of Minsk. On this, Stalin mentions that the last boss of the Gambino was a good man, so he wants to know how a lunatic like Albert came to power. Loki explains that Albert was the only son, albeit a bastard. Suddenly, Noel senses an aura approaching and by the sound, predicts it is someone armed. Then he questions if Loki has sold him out, to which the Faithless confesses he did. Noel comments that it's not very professional for a merchant to set a trap for a client, but the imitator responds that he values his life, having been paid well enough to start a new life in another country. However, the eloquent points out, drawing his pistol, that the young man forgot one detail in the middle of this plan. There's no reason for Noel to let him escape alive, which is a shame since he liked Loki. Loki emphasizes that he also liked the friend and opens his arms to receive a bullet in the chest. Then the protagonist questions where the love for his own life has gone. As for this, the Faithless explains that he truly values himself, but just realized that he not only sold out Noel Stalin, but also handed over his pride and honor as an information dealer. Hearing these words, Noel looks coldly at the man with his pistol in hand, yet decides not to shoot and tells Loki to get out, but warns the imitator not to leave the capital as he will crush the Gambino family. As soon as Stalin finishes his speech, Loki bursts out laughing, followed by crying, and emphasizes that the eloquent really is a character. Then he leaves. Left alone, Noel Stalin drinks a potion for combat that lasts 10 minutes and whose side effects are terrible, but make him much stronger. Shortly after arriving at the venue wearing heavy armor, Koga questions if he is facing Noel Stalin, as he didn't expect to be chasing this seeker he just met today. For his part, Noel didn't imagine that the swordsman was an assassin from the Gambino, so he comments that he really moved up in life by finding a better master. Be that as it may, he draws his weapon and warns that this fight will not be interrupted this time. On the other hand, Koga doesn't draw his sword and confesses that he would not like to fight the eloquent. In fact, he feels he owes Noel for the silver coin. With that, Stalin questions if he will be released from this fight, but imagines that Koga is bluffing for being a mafia lackey. Koga responds that he really can't defy his master's orders, but still has his pride. After all, he is Koga Tsukishima, a C-rank long-sword swordsman specializing in cutting techniques. That said, Noel finds it strange that the guy revealed his cards but decides to be polite and reciprocate by telling that he can use abilities without spending his mana reserves and has inherited the will and techniques of the great Overdieth. As soon as he finishes his presentation, the eloquent fires at the swordsman, who dodges the projectile and charges at his opponent at great speed. Even narrowly escaping death, Noel knows he can't slip up, so he pulls a rope that tied him to the ceiling and fires a flame bolt, which engulfs his adversary in flames. Although he doesn't know the exact weakness of a long-sword swordsman, Stalin assumes that any frontline armed class must be vulnerable to fire, so it may not kill the enemy, but it will certainly cause great damage. However, Koba Tsukishima was able to slice the very air to create a vacuum and prevent the flame from reaching his body, sparing him from death. Then the swordsman again charges at his rival, and the two engage in intense hand-to-hand combat. At one point, Noel nearly hits Koba's lower regions, who manages to escape at the last moment and still complains that the guy was cheating by aiming at his sensitive part. Stalin argues that this is a fight to the death, so whether it's a low blow, sand in the eyes, or a bite in the groin, everything goes. With that in mind, Noel throws a luminous bomb into the air and momentarily blinds his target. However, Koga reacts with his secret blade Subaen Gashi. With this, the cuts of the man are frozen in the air and thrown at the target whenever he wishes, and Noel Stalin begins to feel the pressure from this display of a secret technique of a cutting expert. Even with difficulties, the eloquent manages to escape the first blades, but although he was blind, Koga managed to reach his opponent and attack him with his sword. Almost having been hit, Noel practically falls from a great height and reacts with the howl of the wolf to control the swordsman's momentum, but this ability was unable to affect Koga. In the end, Stalin falls to a new attack. Please subscribe for the next part and hit the like button. See you soon.